Hi there, I'm Laura Brandis and I'm the Communications Director at the POLIS Water Sustainability Project at the University of Victoria. I want to welcome you to this webinar, which is actually a re-recording of two of the presentations that were given at our Water-Energy Nexus webinar held on March 19, 2012. The goal of POLIS's Creating a Blue Dialogue webinar series is to bring together individuals from all sectors of the water field from across the country to learn about and discuss emerging and innovative ideas in water policy and governance. Today's webinar will explore the interconnections and interdependencies between water and energy use. And our speakers today will provide us with a tour of the emerging and priority issues relating to the Water-Energy Nexus in both British Columbia and Ontario. Now, before I go into the speakers' presentations, I want to take a moment to thank all of our webinar partners and sponsors, the Canadian Water Network, the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation, the University of Water Canada Magazine, the Living Water Policy Project, and for this particular webinar, I want to say a special thank you to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and the Pacific Institute, as well as the Trillium Foundation and Great Lakes United. As for today's speakers, Ben Parfitt is a longtime researcher and writer specializing in natural resource management issues. He is a resource policy analyst with the BC office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and much of his current work focuses on the Water-Energy Nexus as part of a joint research initiative between CCPA and the POLIS project. And our second speaker today is Carol Maas, who also hails from the POLIS project as our Innovation and Technology Director. She's worked in a number of capacities in the water and wastewater fields over the years, and is currently working on a collaborative project with Great Lakes United, McMaster University, and the Alliance for Water Efficiency with support from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And this project is exploring the next generation of water conservation policies and practices in Ontario communities. And now I'm going to hand it over to Ben and Carol.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to everyone that's joining in on this call today. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what others have to say following this presentation, and I think we've got a really interesting topic at hand. I'm here today to talk a little bit about a project that is being jointly led by the POLIS Water Sustainability Project here at the University of Victoria and the BC office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Together, both organizations are committed to doing research and communications around issues involving the intersection of water and energy in the province of British Columbia. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit first about what the Water-Energy Nexus is. Exactly what are the connections between water and energy in the province? Water is used to produce an awful lot of energy, particularly hydroelectric power here in British Columbia. But what people often don't realize is that energy is also required to produce a lot of the water-related services that we so often take for granted. The heating up our water, the pumping and moving of water about, and the treatment of water. And all of those important services require energy, and without those services, life as we know it would be non-existent and frankly quite unpleasant. So the Water-Energy Nexus is all about understanding the interconnections between water and energy and the fact that we don't have one without the other. And that is essentially what the Water-Energy Nexus is. It's also important, I think, to provide some context as to why it is important to be looking at the intersecting worlds of water and energy at this time. Here in British Columbia, as elsewhere in the world, we can expect to see continued population growth. And with that population growth, there will be, without question, more demands on our water and our energy services. We're almost certain to see, and in fact are seeing, diversifying and increasing demands for water by various industries in the province. And it's particularly noteworthy that a lot of that water demand and energy demand is centered on the natural resource industries in the province, which are without question the largest consumers of water resources for certain, both here in British Columbia and across Canada. In fact, about 85% of all water usage in the country is associated with natural resource sectors, which include things like the pulp and paper industry, the energy industry, the agricultural sector, and the energy sector. The other thing that's very important when considering the water-energy nexus in British Columbia is the fact that new sources of hydroelectric power are coming on stream. And obviously there is a direct connection between the production of hydroelectric power and water. And lastly, but by no means of insignificance, is the issue of climate change. With climate change, we can expect more ups and downs in peak water flows, and with those ups and downs, we will definitely see challenges as far as the provision of water and water-related energy services is concerned. At the same time that those concerns are unfolding, it's important to also note that we're seeing the ground shifting somewhat in terms of policies as they relate to both water and energy in the province. We are in British Columbia in the midst of a Water Act modernization process. The provincial government is committed to reviewing and revising the Water Act in the province. So that will obviously have great significance moving forward when we think about our water and our energy resources. We've also seen over the last couple of years some significant restructurings occurring in the provincial cabinet with responsibilities for water oversight and water allocations changing. Historically, the responsibilities for water allocations resided with the Ministry of Environment. Over the last 2 years, we saw those responsibilities transferred to the very short-lived Ministry of Natural Resource Operations. And more recently, with the dissolution of that ministry, we now have those responsibilities residing with the new Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations. In addition to those shifting responsibilities in terms of oversight and allocation powers, the provincial government a few years ago committed to a new Clean Energy Act, also called Bill 17. And that act is very significant when we think about the water-energy nexus in the province, because that particular act essentially commits British Columbia to be on a course of being almost entirely self-sufficient in its power generation. And given the historic reliance in British Columbia on power from hydroelectric sources, this act is of great significance. Lastly, we have a provincial government that is promoting a job growth strategy that is focused primarily, although not exclusively, on the natural resource sector. And as I mentioned earlier, natural resource industries are among the biggest users of water and also of power in the province. And as a result of pushing that job strategy, we're seeing strong indications that the government is prepared to move away from what we might call the precautionary principle as far as hydroelectric production in the province is concerned. So a few years ago, when the Clean Energy Act was announced, BC Hydro was supposed to provide power based on low water years. In other words, they had to meet certain power requirements and plan on the basis of historically low water years as opposed to average water years or high water years. Very recently, the provincial government has announced that it is relaxing that requirement, and BC Hydro, a Crown utility that provides power to the public, will no longer have to plan for low water years, but only for average water years. So I mention all of this by way of saying that the policy environment right now in the province is in a great state of flux. There's many different initiatives that are underway, and all of these initiatives will have some impact on our water and energy resources moving forward. So with that background, I want to talk a little bit about where water-derived energy in the province of British Columbia comes from. This particular photograph here is a photograph of the WAC Bennett Dam, and behind the dam, the beginning of what is the largest freshwater body in the province, Williston Reservoir. British Columbia today gets almost all of its power from conventional hydroelectric dams like this one. The WAC Bennett Dam, by the way, is the largest dam in the provincial hydroelectric power system, and it is one of the largest earth-filled dams in the world. But we also get power from other sources, and that power has a water component to it. This picture here, for example, is a picture of the Burrard thermal electric plant near Vancouver. Power produced at that plant is derived from natural gas, but a lot of water is required in the process. So we get some power from thermal, although it's very important to note that in British Columbia, thermal electric power is the exception to the rule. We don't produce a lot of power this way. We're also getting power from smaller run-of-river hydro projects, and there are numerous proposals moving forward for more such projects. Many of these proposals were spurred on by the Clean Energy Act, which I spoke about just a moment ago. We also get power in British Columbia, and may increasingly so, from industries that generate their own power. This particular shot here is a shot of a pulp and paper facility on British Columbia's coast. The pulp and paper industry is a major user of water, but it's also a major generator of power, and it generates power usually by using wood residues to burn and water in conjunction to create steam, which spins turbines, which result in more power being produced. Typically, that power has been consumed within the pulp and paper operations themselves, but we're seeing increasing evidence that companies are improving their efficiencies and are actually channeling excess energy onto the power grid, and we can expect more of that in the years ahead. Lastly, we are getting energy from the capture and reuse of what was previously wasted energy. Here we have a shot of a schematic of a very innovative project that is underway in Vancouver on the southeast False Creek lands. And what they're doing here is they are taking advantage of that heat and channeling it into a community-based heat distribution system. And at the end of the day, by using essentially wastewater, they will be able to provide heat through this one project to 16,000 residents. So having given a very brief and admittedly simple overview of water-related energy production in British Columbia, I want to give people an understanding about what is coming into play in British Columbia in terms of increased demands for water and water-derived power. And I think this will serve as a kind of a cautionary tale, if you will, about what lies ahead for us as a province, as our population grows and as industries diversify. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the emerging shale gas industry in the province and its demands both for water and for hydroelectric power. This particular shot here is an aerial shot of a shale gas well site under development in northeast British Columbia. Significantly, as I'll talk about a little later, this site is very close to the WAC Bennett Dam and the Williston Reservoir, pictures of which I showed you earlier on. In this particular shot, you'll notice a large rectangular pool of water on the left-hand side of the photograph. To give you an idea about how much water is in that particular pool, it's probably the equivalent of about 10 Olympic swimming pools worth of water, or 25,000 cubic meters. To the right of that rectangular water source, you see two circular ponds. Those ponds are intended for the collection of wastewater that is generated in shale gas operations. This particular photograph here, again, comes from an area very close to the Williston Reservoir. You will notice in the shot a blue water truck in the background. The pit, in this particular case, again, is about the equivalent of 10 Olympic swimming pools worth of water. And when I was up in this area 2 years ago, water trucks were running essentially 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, delivering water from local rivers, lakes, and streams, and piping it into these temporary storage pits for subsequent use in shale gas operations. With shale gas operations, what companies do is take very large volumes of water and pressure pump that water deep underground. In this particular schematic, you see what a typical shale gas operation involves. It involves drilling a deep well down to the targeted shale formation, and then drilling that well out very long distances horizontally through the shale. Typically in British Columbia, we're seeing horizontal well bore reaches of up to 2 kilometers in length. When these wells are drilled, they are subsequently stimulated through a process called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. And during that stimulation process, very large volumes of water are pressure pumped at pressures high enough to trigger small earthquakes down into these shale zones. And the result of that action is that fissures, fractures, or cracks open in the shale rock, which is very tightly bound. And as a result of those fractures opening in the rock, gas which is trapped in the rock is then released. In British Columbia today, some of the largest, most intensive water-intensive fracking operations on Earth are now taking place. Industry records are being set for water usage at individual multi-well pads. At some well pads today in British Columbia, the equivalent of about 600 Olympic swimming pools worth of water is pressure pumped underground at up to a dozen wells on one well pad. So obviously a very significant amount of water is used in this process, and it's very important to note when considering the topic at hand that once this water is used, it is essentially removed from the hydrological cycle forever, because once the water is pumped underground, it becomes contaminated with whatever constituents it has come into contact with underground. As one example, fresh water pumped underground may return to the surface following fracking operations with a salinity level that is 5 times that of ocean water. So the water ends up highly contaminated, and it cannot, unless it is treated to a very, very high degree, be reintroduced to the environment. So this is water that is being used and essentially permanently removed from the hydrological cycle. It's also important to note, though, and I am not well appreciated, that the shale gas industry in British Columbia, as it expands, is also going to need an awful lot of electricity too, which essentially means that it's going to need water in another form. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that now. But before doing so, I want to just provide a quick overview of the area that these companies are operating in, one of the areas they're operating in. As I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of the pictures you've seen were taken very close to Williston Reservoir. So here we have a shot again of the WAC Bennett Dam, and behind the dam, the beginning of the massive Williston Reservoir. And this really is a good place, I think, to contemplate the Water-Energy Nexus in British Columbia. The Williston Reservoir, for those of you that don't know, is the largest freshwater body in British Columbia. It was created by the WAC Bennett Dam, which essentially blocked the flow of the Upper Peace River. And with the blocking of the Upper Peace River, we saw the Upper Peace Valley, the Finley and Parsnip River valleys flooded to create the Williston Reservoir. The Williston Reservoir is today the 7th largest reservoir by water volume in the world. There are approximately 70 cubic kilometers of water impounded by the dam. To give you an idea of what that means, if you took the entire greater Vancouver area, you could bury it under 25 meters of water. So essentially bury the 3rd largest metropolitan area in Canada under 25 meters of water. The average residency time of that water in Williston Reservoir is approximately 2 years, which means that every 2 years, that amount of water is essentially being channeled through turbines at the WAC Bennett Dam or adjoining the dam to create power. And that power source represents the single largest source of hydroelectricity or hydroelectric power in British Columbia. Just below the WAC Bennett Dam is the Peace Canyon Dam. And for those of you with sharp eyes, you may notice in the background of this particular photograph a long line of wind turbines. Wind-produced power in British Columbia, however, is the exception to the rule. Hydroelectric power is the overwhelming source of power right now in the province. This dam, the Peace Canyon Dam, is about 20 kilometers downstream from the WAC Bennett Dam. And there is now talk about putting a 3rd dam on the Peace River system about 80 kilometers downstream from the Peace Canyon Dam. If that dam is built, it would be known as the Site C Dam, and it would cause water to back up over an 80-kilometer stretch and result in several thousand hectares of farmland being put underwater. Now, what is driving the shale gas industry's power needs? I want to explain a little bit about that. Gas processing right now in British Columbia occurs in a very remote region of the province, only part of which is actually connected to the existing hydroelectric transmission network. Because of that, there are plans afoot to dramatically expand transmission infrastructure into the more remote northern reaches of the shale gas plays in the province. That is going to involve the likely construction of a transmission grid that would be extended 500 kilometers or so from Fort St. John to Fort Nelson. So that's just one way in which we're going to see increased demands for our power, because the more removed gas producers in the north of the province need access to power so that they can begin to treat gas in new treatment plants and then move that gas about. But there's also very significant proposals for what we call downstream gas facilities. The most important of those are what are known as liquefied natural gas plants. Liquefied natural gas is essentially gas that is turned to liquid through a process of supercooling the gas. And by supercooling the gas to liquid form, it then becomes possible to load the gas onto tankers, which can deliver the gas to countries on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So at this point in time, what the industry and the provincial government are both intent upon is getting pipeline infrastructure built to the west coast of British Columbia, getting new liquefied natural gas plants built, and treating the gas into liquid form so that it can be shipped to China, Japan, Korea, and other Asian markets. The challenge moving ahead is that just one liquefied natural gas plant would require between 8 and 10% of the current hydroelectric production at BC Hydro's facilities. There are at least 6 LNG projects that are under consideration. So it's very easy to see how this rapidly translates into a very significant growth in demand for our finite water-derived hydroelectric power sources. And this, I should say, or emphasize, is just part of a much larger resource industry expansion dream that the provincial government is promoting, which would see not only a rapid expansion of gas industry activities in the north of the province, but also several new mines. And mines, it must be mentioned, are significant power consumers. So all of this is by way of saying that we believe it's important to be looking at the water-energy nexus here in British Columbia, and that we want to start to concentrate our research efforts initially on looking at what we call hotspots on the intersection of water and energy in British Columbia. Obviously, as I've just shown, there are significant challenges moving forward for our interconnected water and energy resources here in the province. But I also think it's important to highlight that there are significant opportunities, that we can do much to conserve our water and energy resources and to use them in a more rational fashion. What we hope to be doing in this report, in addition to showing where the challenges are, is where the opportunities lay. So we will be looking at innovation in terms of water and energy metering, conservation efforts, how water pricing might be used as a tool to ensure greater conservation of water and energy resources, and focusing on innovative projects like the one I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, such as the Southeast Falls Creek wastewater heat capture system. We're hoping to use this report to make the case that we need policy reforms here in British Columbia. And we want to use this initial research as a stepping stone to a second report, which will be much more prescriptive in terms of laying out what the policy vision should be for the province moving forward, if it is intent upon managing its water and water-derived energy resources in a responsible manner. So with that, I want to return just briefly to the Williston Reservoir. As I said earlier, the reservoir is the 7th largest reservoir by water volume in the province. And I think it's safe to say that when work on the massive WAC Bennett Dam began almost 50 years ago, that the people that were working on that dam could hardly have expected that the day would come when water resources and water-derived energy resources would be in question. But I think that day has come. I think that we are much more cognizant today than we were then that there are limits to water and limits to how much energy can be produced from water-derived sources. One of the more telling things about hydroelectric power is that its proponents tend to talk about its value in terms of it being firm power. In other words, the power from these sources is always going to be there. But that's not true. Reservoirs require continuous inputs of new water, and that water comes in the form of precipitation. And we know from statistics kept by BC Hydro that we have seen tremendous variation in the amount of water that is in our reservoirs and therefore the amount of electrical power that can be produced. Swings of as much as 20% from year to year. We can expect as a result of climate change that there will likely be more protracted swings in the years and decades ahead, which makes it even more important, I think, that we pay attention to the water-energy nexus here in British Columbia and plan accordingly. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker, and I look forward to questions. Thank you.
So today I'm going to share with you the results of one of our investigations into the water-energy nexus in Ontario. And the first study that we did on this topic looked at municipal energy use for water provision in Ontario. And this is a snapshot of the report here, and it can be found on our website. But today we are going to explore the results of a second study that we did into the water-energy nexus. And this second study was completed in 2010. And it goes beyond the municipal sector by attempting to understand both how and where energy is used for all water-related services in Ontario today. So we're going to look at how energy is used for water along two different organizing frameworks. The first being different economic sectors. So, for example, residential, power, industrial, each of those different types of sectors. And the second organizing framework being the type of activity that the energy and water are actually involved in. And so in this case, there are three specific activities that we'll look at: pumping and treatment, heating water, and generating steam. And so my hope today is to give you a sense of how and where energy is used for water in Ontario. So to begin with, we can look at Ontario's water withdrawals by sector. So as I'm sure many of you won't be surprised to hear, Ontario's largest water-using sectors are the power sector over here and the manufacturing and residential sectors. Now, if we take a look at the same graph, but in terms of energy, this graph is organized according to the first organizing framework I mentioned, which is total energy inputs to water by economic sector. And by energy inputs to water, I mean the energy that is applied to water to pump, to treat, to heat it, or to generate steam. So, for example, you can see that similar to water use, we have, once again, significant energy inputs to the power sector and also to the residential and manufacturing sector. They make up a big chunk of the pie. But in the case of energy, we also see significant energy inputs to water in the commercial institutional sector, despite the estimates of water withdrawals being relatively small. So through the study, we determined that the total energy inputs to water in Ontario were 976 petajoules per year. However, that doesn't have a lot of significance for most of us. So to put that in a bit of context for you, we found that the energy to power pumps, to run treatment plants, to run hot water heaters and boilers, all of that energy was found to consume 12% of Ontario's entire demand for electricity and 40% of our natural gas demand.
So this is really quite significant in terms of the quantities of energy that we're applying to water in Ontario. And it also corresponds quite well with California's estimates. They have estimated that their energy use for water is, or consumes rather, 19% of all of their electricity and 30% of all their natural gas. So this chart allows us to take a closer look at the energy use by activity. So this is the second organizing framework that I mentioned, where we can take a look at the energy use for steam, for hot water, and for pumping and treatment. So to begin with, you can see that 516 petajoules per year is it's representing the waste heat that's discharged to cooling water in Ontario's thermal and nuclear power plants. And so the reason for this is that less than 35% of the raw energy contained in the fuel is actually transferred to electricity. So, for example, only 35% of the energy contained in the raw nuclear or coal is ultimately transferred to electricity, and the rest needs to be wasted. And so if you contrast this situation to places like Europe or in new combined heat and power plants, they're often using this waste heat for good use in things like district heating or for process heating in industrial situations. And so oftentimes that can significantly reduce both the water use for cooling and the energy wasted. The rest of the activities below the white dotted line here, we've broken them out on the right-hand side so that we can see them a little more clearly. And so outside of the power sector, there's still another 300 petajoules per year to generate steam, and that's primarily, as you can see, in the manufacturing and commercial institutional sectors. And hot water is here in yellow, and you can see residential and commercial hot water use, things as you might imagine like laundry, showering, in both homes and hotels, amongst other places, comprise the majority of energy used for heating water in Ontario. And lastly, we have this little sliver of red down here, which is the energy for pumping and treatment, and that's used in not only the municipal sector, but also in private wells, so wells that would be on-site at an individual household or industry, for example. So again, if we want to try to put the total energy use into more tangible terms, if we consider just the energy demand used to provide hot water, used to provide hot water, cold water, and steam, so basically all of this energy, excluding the energy that's wasted in the power sector, all of that energy is the equivalent of powering every hydroelectric, coal, and nuclear plant in Ontario. So this amount of energy, and however, that we have to be careful not to imply that this chart is representative of the opportunity or of the ease of achieving water and energy use reduction. So this is just quantifying energy use for water. It does not give us any sense of how easy it would be to reduce this energy versus this energy. So this chart is similar to the previous chart in structure, but this time allows us to take a look at the fuel use for each water use activity. So again, we have our water use activities on the left-hand side, steam, hot water, and pumping and treatment. And through this chart, we can see that natural gas is very a common source of. What we found was that 80% of the energy applied to water, again excluding this power generation sector, 80% is derived from fossil fuels. So you can see, as I mentioned, that both steam. What this suggests is that if we were able to reduce the water and energy used for steam and hot water, we also have the potential to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So now we're going to take a closer look at each water-using activity and compare the energy that is used for water-related services to other energy-using activities. Once again, just trying to put some of these numbers into context. So in the industrial sector, we found a particularly strong water-energy relationship. So what we found was that 30% of all fossil fuels used by industry are actually associated with water. They're used to generate steam. And conversely, 20% of all water used by industry is to generate steam. So you have this really strong water-energy nexus in the industrial sector. And if you recall, the commercial institutional sector was the other primary user of steam. And what we found in this sector is that more than half of all energy used for space heating is used within boilers. So again, this means that half of the energy used for space heating is related to water use in some way, in comparison to something like forced air heating, for example. Now, if we take a closer look at hot water use, and we have the opportunity here from the data that we gathered to compare heating water to things like lighting and lighting, transportation, and even space heating. And what we found was that heating water was actually the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in both the residential and commercial sectors. So to put this in even further context, the energy heating for water alone, the 141 petajoules per year, could keep close to half of all Ontarios warm in the winter, meaning it could provide space heating for 50% of all residences. So once again, we find the energy used for water to be quite significant in comparison to other uses of energy. And lastly, looking more closely at energy used for pumping and treatment, I did mention before that the energy used for pumping and treatment appears small in comparison to hot water and steam. But we really need to look at the energy use for each different activity in context. And so if we look at, say, municipal electricity bills, what we find is that the energy used for pumping and treating water and wastewater actually makes up 1/3 to 2/3 of municipal electricity bills. So for them, it is indeed significant. We also found through this study that if we combined both municipally supplied and privately supplied water, the energy used for pumping and treatment of this water could light every home in the province. So once again, in comparison to other uses of energy use for water was significant. And a final stat of possible interest, we looked at water loss in municipal infrastructure, so leaky pipes essentially. And what we found was that the estimates for water loss across the province actually incurs an estimated $15 million every year in lost electricity expenditures. So hopefully some of the numbers that I've presented thus far gives you a sense of the really very interrelated nature of water and energy use in the different major water-using sectors. And in wrapping up, I want to leave you with an example of the potential of this water-energy nexus to yield savings. So to take a look at the opportunity within the water-energy nexus. And this is an example, an industrial example. Day & Campbell is a company in Hamilton, Ontario, and they've been producing autoclaved concrete, so you can see a picture of it here, for over 60 years. And through an energy audit by Union Gas, they revealed an opportunity to recirculate steam from the autoclaves back to the boiler. And what they found was that the condensate from the autoclave, so the wastewater from the autoclave, it was too contaminated for the storm sewers and also too hot to directly discharge to the sewer. So this was a pretty nasty stream. They then identified that recirculating the steam would be an ideal solution to the problem, but the water was too contaminated. So by engaging water specialists, they were able to come up with a solution, a treatment solution, which was, even with the additional treatment equipment, still incredibly cost-effective, with a total retrofit payback period of only 2.5 years. So after 2.5 years, they were making money off of this solution that saved incredible amounts of water and energy and greenhouse gas emissions as well. So a really compelling example. So that was just one example of really many opportunities that exist to save both costs and reduce environmental impacts by considering the two resources together. So I do want to leave you with the notion that given the significant energy use associated with water-related activities across a vast array of economic sectors, many of which we looked at today, that we might consider a water sector as offering a new lens with which to integrate things like energy reporting, research and conservation strategies. So what I mean by this is, opposed to looking at water or energy use, by economic sector, we might look at the energy use applied to the entire water sector as an organizing framework. And what this has the potential to offer is it suggests that collaboration between water and energy experts could allow us to bring some new opportunities to light, and importantly, allow us to account much more holistically the return on investments for water and energy saving strategies. In closing, I just wanted to say a special thank you to our supporters of the water energy work, and also to the Trillium Foundation for allowing me to be with you today and deliver this webinar.